time, Swipe Right to Vote, and online voting future-proof elections. So Parliament Week is a week aimed at engaging young people with politics, making them get involved. So obviously, the key theme behind online voting is that it will help engage young people, of whom only 44% turned out to vote in the last election. So on our panel today we have Chloe Smith, MP, Mike Summers from Smartmatic, Rachel Stroud, Amy Lamé, and Mita Desai. So Chloe Smith is one of the leading voices in Parliament for online voting. She's a Conservative Party Member of Parliament for Norwich North and has previously held the office of Economic Secretary to the Treasury and the Parliamentary Secretary for the Cabinet Office. She was elected to Parliament in 2009 in the by-election, becoming the youngest member of the House of Commons. Mike Summers is the Commercial Director for Smartmatic Cybernetica. Based in Estonia, Smartmatic's team of network engineers, researchers and election technology consultants specialise in the implementation of secure, verifiable and accessible internet voting in government elections. Estonia is currently the only country in the world to use internet voting in national parliamentary elections. And I think he has up to 10 years experience in this field, is that right?
Although it looks like it's more.
Much less, I'm sure. Rachel Stroud is the campaign manager for Be Inspired and Do Something UK's Swing the Vote campaign. The Swing the Vote campaign has been speaking to young people, finding out what would make them vote, and has been working with politicians, political parties, and even celebrities to recognise the importance of the youth vote. The campaign has worked with people such as Rick Edwards and Pixie Locke and has had a lot of success. And she knows a lot about participation. When I first met her, I was quite impressed. Amy Lamé is a broadcaster and Labour Party activist. Originally from New Jersey in America, she moved to London in 1992, where she's got a career in TV, radio and stage and now politics. From May 2010 to May 2011, she was the mayoress of the Borough of Camden. She's an advocate of online voting and for engaging young people with the political process. Mita Desai is the chair of the British Youth Council. She has a lot of experience in representing young people and has worked with charities such as the National Citizen Service, DebateMate and Envision. And the British Youth Council is a charity that works to empower young people and promote their interests. It also runs the UK Youth Parliament. And myself, I'm Marie Chowdhury. I set up WebRoots about 6 months ago. You see a pretty funny picture of me. That's me holding my dissertation about a year and a half ago, which was about how the internet's impacted political participation. And a subpart of that was looking at online voting. So that's really what's spurred my interest in this area. Hopefully I look a bit better than I do there now. The panel discussion will run for 45 minutes from 6:45 to 7:30. We'll then have a short Q&A session where the best 3 questions will win these chocolates, by the way. So think of it as you go. So maybe you'll share it around. So, first question: why do we need online voting? So how do people engage with politics nowadays? Where do they get their information from? A recent study has shown that more people get their news from the internet than they do from traditional methods like TV and newspapers. This question I'd like to start with Rachel. So how do people engage with politics nowadays, in particular young people?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is that I think you've spoken about the fact that young people are not voting in as great numbers as they have been historically, and there's often a perception that perhaps young people are apathetic, they don't care about politics. We find that that's not really the case at all. They're not apathetic, they're just acting in lots of different ways. Being politically active is fragmented. People are using social media, they're using online petitions, they're using volunteering in their local communities, and viewing all of those as more immediate, quicker ways to make an impact on issues a lot of the time. So yeah, people are taking action in different ways and finding their information from lots of different sources, often the internet, and often through social media is the kind of biggest source of political information for young people, certainly.
Chloe, do you think that online voting is a way of engaging people if we are campaigning, as we say, online a lot, especially young people? Do you think online voting is the answer, or is it just another method that no one is going to take up?
So it's one of the answers. So if the question is how do we get more people to vote, this is one of the answers.
Yeah.
There's a whole set of stuff, none of which is enough on its own, and I hope all of which we can go through and discuss tonight. But yeah, so this is one of the answers. I've always been quite frustrated, I think, when you think about, let's say you were using a supermarket site to buy one of these, you would be able to follow the process all the way through from advertising, at which point you decide you want this brand instead of the other one. You would be able to take it all the way through, put it in your shopping basket online, and do all of that in about 3 minutes flat. and not have to change channel while you did it? What is it about politics that says, okay, you can have an online conversation, you can discuss all your great ideas, your projects, your plans, and then you have to stop all of that and then go to a different place that is open for fixed hours and essentially break your flow. It's highly inefficient for one thing, but I think it's also just not going to keep up with the way we live our lives nowadays.
So, Amy, the Labour Party's been doing a lot in terms of they've started a review called Generation Y Review. Do you think that there is a crisis in turnout amongst young people? And do you think that we do need radical action to counter it?
I absolutely think we need radical action. When 44% of 18 to 25-year-olds voted in the last general election, that's telling us something. That's telling us that the traditional method of voting is not working. And I agree with what Rachel said. It's not that young people aren't engaged. It's just they're engaging in different ways. And we have to respond to that. Anyone who was born 1985 and after has lived in a digital world. The idea of using pen and paper, just, of course we can, and, we may choose to, but young people today are just engaged in such a different way that those of us that were born before 1985, sort of remember nostalgically, the days of going in and when I engage in conversations with people about online voting, old people maybe of my generation and older say, but it's so nostalgic. I love going in and I love the feeling of, filling in, putting the X in the box or, drawing the curtain and, being in there on my own. And it is nostalgic. And I'd hate to see that end, but, at the same time, we have to have an adequate response to this crisis of young people being disengaged. It's not that they are not engaging with the issues, they're not engaging with the way the issues are presented to them. So, and I think that what the Labour Party is doing, obviously I would say, I think it's great. And, Sadiq Khan has led that campaign, especially around voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, which is something I've been campaigning on as well.
So this point of nostalgia in voting, do you think, Mita, that this is something that, say, obviously you represent a lot of young people in the British Youth Council, do you think this is something that young people in particular feel? Do they feel a nostalgia in voting, or do they get thrill of it in other ways? So, for example, you have people campaigning with ice bucket challenges on the internet, lots of different campaigns on the internet. Do you think that young people have that same nostalgic feeling, or do you think something new could come out of a different voting system?
Yeah, I think young people are absolutely engaged, as was mentioned before by the other panelists. We know that young people are some of the most likely people to volunteer. We know that young people are absolutely interested in social issues. It's just that why is there not that connected to voting? And I think the answer lies in the idea of trust. So there's a lot of conversations around why aren't young people engaged in the political process? But we should be asking the question is why isn't the political process engaging with young people? There is a lot against young people. Currently we face the biggest cuts in youth services. We have young people who are given lots of rights and responsibilities, yet don't have the freedom for votes at 16. And we know that young people can't really trust in those policies since we've seen dramatic cuts when politicians say that they're going to have no tuition fees and then introduce tuition fees, young people are feeling disengaged by those processes and there's a lack of trust in those systems. So I think a conversation like this, which is saying, do we need to engage young people somehow, and actually asking young people, what do you think and how can we best engage you, builds up this level of trust, which I think is so needed and necessary. We found in the British Youth Council hold an issues-based, the British Youth Council also run the UK Youth Parliament, and part of that they give a ballot of 10 different issues which young people can vote on, and we found that over 876,000 young people voted on that because that was issues-based. It was also online, and it was young people engaging young people in a way they like to be engaged. So there's a lot to be said there about actually asking young people and trying to best engage with them. So that's the answer to it.
posting on Facebook and stuff like that. Have you noticed that in Estonia, is there a bit of that sort of sense of pride in voting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that just because you're offering an online mechanism of voting that nostalgia ever disappears. People in Estonia are very proud of the fact that they have a secure, verifiable internet voting system, and they realise the importance of the voting process. So in the same way as my parents would be proud of the fact they went to the polling stations, people in Estonia are proud of the fact they're engaging, and they're proud of the fact that they've got this secure digital channel to cast their ballot. So yeah, there is that same sense of understanding of how important the process is. Just because they're doing it online, I don't think that nostalgia or that importance is never diminished. It's just using a different channel to cast your ballot.
So, Amy, you have quite a large following on Twitter. Have you found that young people or your followers in general, have they engaged with news that you post or ideas that you post on social media? Do you think that? So I was in a Twitter chat with Meg Hillier during the day, and she said that turnout is the only benefit of online voting. To which I replied, actually, it would increase awareness and engagement. And do you think that would be the case with online voting? Do you think it would force politicians to listen to young people more?
Yeah.
Go after their vote?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to that. First of all, I've done a lot of work in my other job is sort of running an arts organization, and started an arts project with 18 to 25-year-olds. And we talk a lot about politics, and they seem very frustrated that politics, the same old things. All politicians sound the same. They all look the same. So we need to be able to change our method of engagement and the way that message is delivered. Going back to also what Rachel said earlier. And in terms of the sort of bigger package, I guess in order to answer your question, I'd like to wrangle with a couple of different things. One of those is, and online voting is just like one part of a bigger package that I think we need to address in order to bring democracy into the 21st century. We need voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, because this is going to force all political parties to engage with young people and create policies that are in favor of young people, not just pay lip service. And this goes back to what Mita was saying earlier. If you pick apart George Osborne's budget announcement in March, it focused on pensions, it focused on savings, people that have money to save. None of this sounds anything like any young people that I know, not even people my age, to be honest. But they're focusing on a particular demographic, one that speaks to typical Tory voters. So they're doing very targeted things with their policies and budget. How might a political landscape change if young voters were enfranchised? It would mean that all political parties would be forced to make policies that engage young people and are positive towards young people. You can look at all the political parties, maybe picking on the Tories, okay, it's an easy target. But we can look at all political parties and how they've ignored young people, and how voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, that enfranchisement would change things. Alongside that, I believe we need mandatory citizenship education in schools. Now this would equip young people to make informed decisions and increase engagement across socioeconomic backgrounds. Going back to this again, all politicians look the same, all politicians sound the same. Privately educated young people in this country think of politics as a career choice because they learn it in school. Politics isn't mandatory as part of the national curriculum. How can we flip this around? Because if young people that are going to state schools think about politics as a career, and they're having mandatory citizenship education alongside this, how might Parliament look different 20 years down the line? I find that really exciting. This also makes me question why some political parties might be against online voting or mandatory citizenship education or voting for 16 and 17-year-olds, because keeping the status quo keeps certain political parties happy. Yeah? Now, you know I'm a labor supporter, you know I'm a labor activist, so of course I'm going to say, you know, this suits a conservative political agenda, in my opinion. I also think we need mandatory voter registration in schools. Now, this is done, you know, I grew up in the States, and this was done in my school, in my high school, as part of history class. Now here, it could be done as part of a mandatory citizenship education. This would empower young people, because we know the people, if they vote young, they're much more likely to vote again. And it's also a situation where if you're registered as part of your schooling, even if you're too young to vote at the time, you will know that the next time an election comes round, you will be able to vote. And it's, you know, it's not like, oh, I'm too late to fill out that form. You will have already done it at school. Your teacher would have sent it to whatever office it needs to be sent to. And then, of course, online voting. When we know that 84% of UK households have access to the internet, you know, the argument here is being made very well, but I think that we need to see online voting as part of a bigger package of changing the way democracy works for the 21st century, and those are my sort of main points of how I believe we need to do that and make online voting part of it.
Those ideas are quite important. I mean, what's the research you found in Swing the Vote? I mean, I guess the purpose behind Swing the Vote is that young people can actually swing an election one way or another.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the things that comes out a lot, we've been working with young people for a long time on this, is this sense that I can't make a difference by voting. I find it hard to connect what's going on in Parliament to my everyday life. And a lot of that is around, you know, there's a lot of kind of jargon and tradition and things that feel quite archaic often to young people. And I don't think having a paper-based voting system necessarily helps with that. Perhaps online voting would make it feel a little bit closer to kind of everyday 21st century life in a way that would perhaps, as both Amy and Chloe said, it's part of a package of different things that need to change, and it's not the solution by itself. But showing willingness to move towards kind of more of a more relevant channel that perhaps resonates better with the way people conduct their everyday life, definitely I think would help and show willingness.
So in the UK Youth Parliament, they do use a lot of online resources for raising awareness and educating young people. Do you think, because they also use online voting for their member of Youth Parliament elections and also to select their campaigns? That's correct. So do you think it would be as effective in engaging people if we didn't have that final step, which is what a lot of people see online voting as part of the broader package?
Actually, in terms of the voting process that we had as a part of the process, so a lot of the time that'll be part of the shortlisting process, and then we'll have a wider debate and people will vote in person. So the process of the Make Your Mark ballot, which I spoke of before, was like the first. The 10 issues were kind of discussed through YouTube videos and stuff online, and then voted on with a combination of voting and stuff. So yeah, I think that it was part of that process in terms of getting people on board. I also think that part of that enables for more informed decision in a safe space, because a lot of what young people feel sometimes is that a lot of people speaking in politics have very strong opinions, and people who don't have those strong opinions and maybe just want to find out a little bit more get a bit put off, because once you write something or say something, then people just kind of like come at you with these big kind of strong opinions. And what we know is that actually young people don't have necessarily big political biases, which I think is actually a good thing, because you're not born into a family that says, I'm Labour, I'm Conservative, I'm Liberal Democrat, therefore I'll vote that way, and that doesn't make a very good democracy. What makes good democracy is making informed decisions based on facts and opinions and weighing stuff up. And I think that having safe spaces online, but also in person, creates for a better democracy. In terms of the British Youth Council's position on online voting, I think we need to consult young people as to how that would actually affect them on a wider scale. I'm personally for it because I think that it will enable for better democracy because it allows for a more individualised approach. Not everybody wants to go to a voting station. Not everyone sees it as this big part of their life. And some people just might want to vote on it just before, after work and go out for a quick drink. Other people may want to go to the vote booth. So I think that we actually shouldn't be kind of saying this one size policy fits everybody and having it through those mechanisms.
So Chloe, just a point that was made
Like,
earlier.
give me a recap.
So the point that was made earlier by Amy was that certain political parties might not want online voting or younger people to vote because it might damage them at the ballot box in terms of they'll vote a certain way. Do you think that's the case with the Conservative Party? Do you think that if more young people vote the Conservative Party might change their policies or every party?
No, I think I I respect the intellectual point, but I think in application it's rubbish. It's a trap that any self-respecting party would just not consider it worth falling into. It's so crucially important to make political parties themselves continue to be relevant to every new generation that comes. I mean, tonight's talk actually, I think, is not only about young people. Parliament Week is not only about young people. Online voting is not only about digital natives. It's about anybody who would find it more convenient to use it that way. And to me, the much broader point here is that political parties, as a format of a party, is also, shall we say, on the down and out. You know, parties have to explain their worth in a space of politics where, as Mita says, it's no longer the case that you might have an inherited voting tradition, or it's no longer the case, certainly no longer the case, that you might have two large parties that dominate. All of these things are moving and changing. And to me, that's a very good thing. This is a space of competition. And what is politics if not a battle for ideas? Inherently, a new generation that keep on coming. There's more of them every year. That's a good thing. You're on a hiding to nothing. It is not possible to continue to play a vibrant part in a vibrant democracy without looking to a new generation. Now, specifically on politics, my party also, I think, has a lot to say to a generation, for example, that also has a dwindling sympathy with the welfare state. There's all sorts of interesting policy places to have that debate. There's all sorts of interesting values to have that debate upon. I don't think that tonight's subject matter actually is party political at least.
Okay, so moving on to the next question, which is, what are the benefits and challenges of online voting? So we've covered a few of the benefits already, I think, so I think we might start with the challenges. So the question that every time we raise this idea, the question will be, can it be secured? What if someone hacks it? How do we ensure that someone's casting their ballot in secret? So I'm going to point this over to you, Mike, because we have the most experience of everyone on this panel. How do you make that happen?
Well, it's a very good question, and as you say, people always question the security of online systems. But I think it's important to consider online voting within the context of the existing provisions for remote voting, for example. And when we talk about the UK context, we talk specifically about postal voting. So I think that online voting is significantly more secure than postal voting. The physical and logical security measures around postal voting are very, very weak. And people always talk about, well, within the online voting environment, you have online banking systems which are hacked. How do you stop that happening within an online voting environment? And the reality is that you actually engineer far more robust security measures into an internet voting system than you would do into any internet banking system. But the difference between an online voting system and an online banking system is that in an online banking system, you actually have a method of checking by going online and seeing, so for example, if a spurious, bogus transaction has happened on your account, and any online voting system needs that method of you being able to check that the system has captured your vote correctly. So, yes, you absolutely need a system that has security measures, but you also need a system that has what we call verifiability measures, i.e. a mechanism for you as a voter and for any auditor that's auditing a system to go and check that the system has not been compromised. So, for example, the way it's done in Estonia is once the voter has cast their ballot online, they can then take their smartphone and through a verification application, they can check that the system has captured their vote in the method that they, or in the manner that they had intended. And they can do that for 30 minutes after they cast their ballot. So I think it's important that you deal with security. I think it's important that any system has a verification scheme. And I think that one of the ways that you help create public trust in the system is to not just take vendors like ourselves' word for it. You bring in independent auditors that can look at the source code, that can verify that the system is behaving correctly, that the protocols themselves can be verified, and you be honest and open about it, because of course transparency is absolutely part of the democratic process. And within the electronic realm, I think it's important to be arguably more transparent than in the paper-based realm.
So, you're talking about verifiability. So the Cabinet Office recently made a tool called Gov UK Verify. And I don't know if you worked on it, actually, yes, when you were there. But do you think that is a tool that we could use, or do we? One of the criticisms is that we can't trust the government with IT projects. So do you think it should be within the government's hands, or should we be contracting them out, or should we be building our own?
I wasn't specifically aware of the specific project you mentioned. I left the Cabinet Office in October last year, so if it's something in that period, I wouldn't be able to comment on it expertly. Yes, I think there should always be a healthy scepticism of big IT projects, and that's perfectly sound and fair. But I think the threshold here that we're actually talking about is to be as secure as paper currently is. I mean, let's be practical about it. We're not. I don't think we're not looking to. Obviously, not looking to be less secure. That's a basic for this argument. I don't know. I'm not a technical enough expert to know if we could aim for online or mobile or internet voting to be more secure than paper. But let's be realistic and seek to make it as good as the current alternative. There are I think there are lots and lots of people who would wish that project well, and indeed there are people who would wish that project badly. I mean, there will be threats to this, as there are to banking, dating, shopping, chatting, who works. But I think can I also just lob in a point here that actually came up when I was speaking to a group in my constituency in Norwich on Thursday night, and they were saying, well, what there ought to be is a kind of independent source of all information to help us make decisions on our vote. And I said, fine, I couldn't agree with you more. You want good information, but there isn't actually no such thing as an independent source of something that you get to set up. The market can do that, and as I said before, this is a battle of ideas kind of thing. You can compete to have good ideas and good information that can fill a space or fill somebody's need, but there is no such thing actually as asking the government to set up something that is sparklingly clean and white and above all other things. It's going to be subject to the normal stresses and strains of everyday life, to the stresses and strains certainly of having been paid for by taxpayers. I think we ought to be realistic about some of those things, and I think we ought to start now on the consideration of all those questions in terms of the campaign for online voting starting here. We have to start that now, because it will take 10 years to get through all of these kind of issues. And if we leave this another 10 years, we are another decade behind what people ordinarily just expect out of the internet and the thing that we're failing to give them through voting at the moment.
So that's an important point you made about it will take 10 years, because that would imply that it would take more than one parliament, any role for everyone, the public, but also the Labour Party, to lobby other political parties to commit to cross-party support for this programme, so that it would continue past 5 years.
I think the only way it will work is with cross-party support, and that is democracy, right? And I think that there are some things that should just be above and beyond party political, sort of engagement, and that that online voting is one of those. I can't speak for how the general field of the Conservative Party is on this issue, nor the Liberal Democrats, but I know there's a big commitment within the Labour Party to make it happen. So I don't know, Chloe, what the feeling of your colleagues are on online voting.
Well, absolutely. I mean, there was a survey that did show in the Conservative Party the desire for online voting is much less than the Labour Party, and I think even the Liberal Democrats. I mean, what needs to be done within your own party to get people on board and get them to support this idea? So that is a big challenge, getting political will.
Sure. Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, so as I said in the previous answer, I genuinely do not think this is a party political question. I think actually, in many ways, we should be putting parties to one side here and convincing the general public. My party has voters and supporters like any other party. We wish to serve and we seek to serve the general public. So let's actually make this argument in public. This is not some kind of behind closed doors party smoke and mirrors job. Let's do this out in the general public. The pensioners that I represent in Norwich North would absolutely want to understand the security of their vote if they were asked to change the way they did it. Now, it may well be the most sensible thing to run two systems at once, which is what I believe Estonia has done as well. So they ran paper and
That's
online
right,
at the
yeah.
same time to accommodate as many people as possible. That seems sensible to me. But this is really not a party political thing. This is actually about convincing the general public that this is something that's safe and sensible.
Well, I do think it is party political because it will, whether this happens or not, will depend on which party is in power. And if the Labour Party is behind it and the Labour Party is in power, then it will happen. And if the Conservatives are in power and they're not really behind it, then it won't. So that kind of, that's just the way things happen, right?
Sure. So there's a logical circle. No, of course. There's a logical circle. But my point is that actually here we all are as interested individuals. We are all here with different capacities to be out influencing people. I'm simply saying that in addition to what needs to be done inside party rooms, there is a debate that we all can and must have in public, and there are many, many more people in public that we must carry these arguments to. And I mean, of course Amy's right. Of course that comes back around the circle in the sense of support for positions in elections. But let's not forget actually what Rachel has rightly said about the way many young people are choosing to participate in informal politics, not formal politics. I really wouldn't want this only to be a matter for, as it were, the traditional formal side of politics. Let's embrace what young people themselves are campaigning with.
I think there are bigger issues at play around trust, around what Mita was saying about believing that your vote is going to make a difference because the people you voted for are going to stick to what they promised that they would do. And I think, unfortunately, that young people who kind of fall within that 18 to 25 age bracket at the moment have experienced a few things that perhaps have led them to question that. But that kind of links into how we would implement online voting and what we were discussing a few minutes ago around, at a point where young people are quite mistrustful of institutions, finding a provider to provide an online voting system who they both trust to be completely non-partisan and has the technical skill to deliver something really secure is a challenge.
In terms of on youth polls, you have manifestos that go with the online voting system. Do you think if we had that in general elections, do you think young people would be more engaged? Does it help engage young people with policies or people in general with policies that they're voting for? So you have a lot of different elections, local council elections, European Parliament elections. Do people really know what they're voting for? And do you think that having the information there and readily available has helped people become more educated as well as taking part?
I think it comes back to that package idea, because in the UK Youth Parliament we hold a lot of debate and we hold a lot of ways of engaging individuals. So like Chloe mentioned earlier, it's important for the public to be engaged in this debate, and I think the best way to do that is through political education in order to make these informed decisions and have strong opinions on things, because a lot of the time, for instance, when we talk about the budget deficit, like for a lot of people that's just like, I don't really care. Like But if you break it down as to what that means for individuals, suddenly, all of a sudden, everybody realises they're connected to the idea of a budget deficit, or whether they believe particular party policies to do with that. In the same way as online voting, if we were able to have that debate in schools as to what does that mean for you, how would you engage in it, I think that would enable for more informed decisions. So to answer your question about the UK Youth Parliament, I think a lot of people actually just want to be engaged in a way that is individual to them and to have informed decisions that they can make decisions on. And that comes from a package rather than like a single thing.
The point of education, there is a lot of education to go alongside any new voter reform, in particular online voting. I mean, people will need to understand the system, understand how it's to be trusted, even understand how to use it, because it wouldn't necessarily be on one day. It could be over a week or 2 weeks. It could be, like you said, if it involves downloading another application. What does that mean? And what kind of education planning would you want to see in this country? What has there been in Estonia? Has there been a similar thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really important that if you want people to use these systems, you absolutely have to go through this kind of knowledge transfer process. And it's not simply a case of if you build it, they will come. You absolutely need to get people to understand how the system works. So, for example, in Estonia, they have this huge kind of publicity campaign that explained to people actually physically what does the user interface look like, what does the experience look like, how does the system protect the security of the vote, your anonymity as a voter, how does the information system look like, how is the vote encrypted, how is the vote digitally signed. So you absolutely need to take all of the stakeholders through that process, not just the voter, but the electoral management bodies, local authorities. You've got the electoral commission. You need them to get behind it. You need the political candidates and agents to really understand how the system works. So it's a very kind of multi-tiered educational process, and any vendor would they will tackle that probably 2 years or a year before a system is ever rolled out. So you really get acceptance and trust in the system. Knowledge transfer is absolutely part of that process. You have to do it. You're talking about.
How would you do it 2 years before? Let's say you've got an election coming up. Wouldn't you have to do it 2 years before that election? You'd have to, I assume, create a lot of content about what it's going to look like.
Absolutely, and you need to. There are some baseline concepts that you can start to educate people around in terms of information security, and in terms of, as I say, how the system maintains the privacy of the vote and the anonymity of the vote. And then as you get close to the actual election event and the design of the user interface has been decided, you can have things like Adobe Flash demos that kind of take the voter through that process and explain how they access their ballot, how they mark it, how if they want to change their mind they can go back, and then how if they ultimately are happy with the selections they've made, they can cast their ballot. So that there really is, you treat the whole thing as a program. It's a real educational program that you have to initiate at the time that you kind of kick the process off.
Okay, going to move on to the next question, which is, what should voting look like in 2035? 2035 is when, if someone was born today, on the basis of being able to vote 18, this will be the first election that they vote in.
That rather than a voter having to go to a specific polling station in their local authority, the polling stations will be set up so regardless of who you are in your local authority, you can go to any one of those polling stations and your specific ballot will be presented to you. But I think, there will be a massive opportunity to reduce the number of polling stations, and this is inevitable. This is going to happen. I absolutely believe that.
So one of the other things that we're campaigning for is to have interactive elections, by which you mean elections that are integrated with social media, so you can vote and then share on Facebook and Twitter, or you'll have a button on Facebook that tells you to vote. So how important have you found smartphones are in terms of engaging young people? And do you think in 2035 you could have a push notification from Facebook saying, make sure you vote in the elections?
I'd be saying something really obvious by saying that mobile devices are really, really, really key for engaging with people, and it's something crazy like 70% of traffic that we get as a youth organisation to any of our channels is coming through mobile, and that's only going to increase. So yes, whatever solution we have to online voting absolutely has to work through mobile and through social media as well. I mean, I think as Chloe kind of touched on earlier, that journey whereby you kind of seek your information online, or you find or you see what your friends are doing, and then it's broken by having to get out of your house and take a physical act, as opposed to kind of continuing that journey. I can see that would be really crucial as well to printing information.
So what are your views, Mita, in 2035? What would you like to see voting message?
I'd like to see voting more connected to issues, and I think that through social media that can happen better. I think that the reason why we have democracy is because we know that people's lived experiences means that they should be informing those policies. But currently we have political parties that have general ideas which we follow, whereas things that the public generally agree on, we don't necessarily see that in the public. So for instance, when we look at the education system, we know that people are actively dying because of a lack of first aid. This can easily be changed through having first aid in the PE system like they have in Sweden. And the majority of the public are in favour with this, as they are in favour of things like no more page 3. But we don't see a way of us interacting with that in the party policy. So if there was a way where parties could have like their general like policies and get people to vote on those things, and that forms party policies, I think that will make better democracy. So I hope that in the future we will have a kind of integrated system where parties are talking about issues and not just we are the party.
For this to be really effective in terms of piloting and measuring whether turnout increases, you need to, like I said, if you were to integrate with social media, you would have to use regional elections, such as mayoral elections, to really gauge that turnout increase, because with Facebook and Twitter, they all tend to work on in Manchester, London, Birmingham. They don't work on ward levels. So do you think we should be piloting online voting in mayoral elections?
I would love to see a pilot of online voting in the upcoming mayoral election. I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's too soon.
But any future mayoral elections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what should voting look like in 2035? Well, I hope by 2035 that online voting seems really old-fashioned, and that we're thinking about the new wave of how to vote. Piloting this, I would like to see this, really sort of ready to go for the 2020 election. And I don't know whether that's a possibility or not, whether I'm being too hopeful, but I think that should be a goal. So then 15 years down the line, that online voting is just seen as completely normal. And I don't even know if we will need paper voting by 2035. I don't know. With this recent, I just want to echo what Rachel and Mita said as well, because the Office for National Statistics put out some figures around the UK's current digital landscape, and 87% of young people use the internet on their phone, and that's just young people, of which I'm not one, and I'm completely addicted. So, will an app be sufficient? What will apps be out by 2035? Will we be voting through? I don't know, like Google contact lenses, or who knows? Yeah.
Maybe I'm just thinking it might be interesting because I just had to get up and physically go to vote. Can I just give a reflection on that? It strikes me actually that in that act I just had to do that there is a little lesson perhaps in that. We might want to apply it to the question you just asked. So what I just had to go do was walk down a voting lobby. There's two, one either side of the Commons chamber. Your question is always binary. Do you want A or do you want B, which is yes or no. So actually, Mita is very much issues-based. Actually, technically, issue by issue, you're voting in that sense. one of the great advantages of doing so, as opposed to me having continued to sit here and just pressed a button to what I thought would want to happen, is that it allows me to interact with other parliamentarians. I have heard it said, I think in the States about Congress and Senate, and I think here as well, that if you, for example, if you held debates on the basis of publishing a speakers list in advance, so you always knew as a parliamentarian or as a congressperson when you were due to speak, whether you were due at 7:20 or 6:20. Essentially, you would only just turn up for your small bit, and you'd never have any interaction with any others. Now, it seems to me that would give you a great poverty of debate. Actually, you really lose out if you allowed the sort of electronic, highly organised world to take over to that extent in terms of debate. And I think it's also possibly true with the voting system that we use here. I think there's an argument to be made that in places or contexts where interaction is important, you don't want to reduce that interaction by allowing the kind of more isolated world of electronic works to take it all away. I can totally assure you that parliamentarians would make themselves too busy doing great stuff like this, or seeing their constituents, or doing any number of other things, other than going and walking for 10 minutes along a corridor. The natural instinct would be to be too busy to do so. So I think you might experience in the 2035 version of how should we vote inside Parliament, if you allowed interaction to dwindle, you might experience a worsening of the quality of what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I'd love your reflections on that. I just thought it might be worth reflecting on, because
we'll have a Q&A session.
Yeah.
But in terms of speed of technology, it's moving. In 8 years, we went from no Facebook, Twitter, and Wikipedia to millions and billions relying on those services. Do you think that technology could move so fast that if we don't start investing in online voting now, the divide between politics and the way people live their lives will be really, really far apart?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And I think back to the last series of pilots of internet voting which took place in the UK, and that was in 2007, which was, absolutely before kind of the hook of Facebook took hold. So I absolutely think we have to start now. And I think that coming back to a point earlier on that Chloe mentioned about having this really looking to the future and putting a kind of marker in the sand and saying, by this date we need to be trying something. We need to be trying. We want to be doing online voting in parliamentary elections and gradually building up to that. Because I think one of the ways that you help create public trust is you have this very measured approach of kind of scaling up. And I think one of the reasons that Estonia has been successful is that they really had, they put a marker in the sand and said, listen, we want to be doing this, and we want to take a measured, step-by-step approach, and to prove the viability of technology, and to give it a chance to work. And I think that in 2007, when we did the trials before, the pilots really, there was no defined success criteria, and things were not given a chance to work. So I think it's really important that we approach any application of technology in a very sensible way. We need to start. It's not going to happen in 2015, because I don't think anybody's going to put their head above the parapet and trial a system for them. But absolutely 2016, in local elections, we should be trying internet voting and then scaling it up. And I would argue that in something like the GLA election in 2016, we should be trying it in a mayoral event, in a larger mayoral event. And I think we need to be trying all these kinds of things.
Okay, so we're moving on to our last question, which is, how can we make it happen? So we've obviously touched on this a lot already. But I'm going to start with Chloe Smith. What do you think the steps should be from now until we have a system of online voting?
So I would start with one thing I already said, which is I think we need to take the general public with us. I suspect that even tonight with your excellent organisation, we're still having a fairly minority pursuit kind of debate here. I think we need to make it much, much, much wider. So well done to you and all who can do that. I think from there follows then the circle we were just talking about, where parties and those in the mainstream of current politics need to properly address it. I think we need to ensure then that, as it were, Mita's troops could really pull in behind it. But I don't mean behind in the sense of following others. I think there's a space for young people to lead this. I think the technical side, I genuinely think the technical side actually will take several years to get right, and from my knowledge of Parliament, I would also add that actually it would take a further several years to legislate comfortably for it, accommodate the testing, accommodate the kind of reassurances that Parliament would rightly want on behalf of people in advance of any given election. So I really do think we're talking actually about several sort of big chunks of time to get this done.
I think it would be substantial legislation change.
Yes, I think it would. I'm afraid I couldn't name for you actually what the act is that says it must all be done on paper. Is there such a thing? Actually, I really want to research this.
Well, I mean, the Law Commission, I think are reviewing essentially the legislative framework, and I think they're due to publish their new findings in 2020. But as far as I'm aware, there are still no provisions for electronic voting in any means in that. So if we're going to do a meaningful project in 2020 in a parliamentary election, it's critical framework in place to enable technology to be used in the voting experience.
So the legal question that goes with it is whether it's currently prohibited in law. And I must confess I haven't. I should go and check that first thing in the morning.
To enable it to happen, there has to be secondary legislation that's passed, which is what had to happen in 2007. So we need to start looking at that now, I would say.
So if that doesn't happen, would you therefore say 2020 is unrealistic?
2020 is still not out of the question, but it's a lot harder. If you have to get secondary legislation passed, for each local authority that had to actually implement the system, legislation would have to be passed for each local authority.
Back to Chloe, do you think it should be a single supplier that provides this, or do you think it should be broken up between several suppliers that can audit each other? So the challenge that people may have is that how can we trust a single company to run the national elections?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this would be something of an undeveloped market in the UK, frankly. So, and across the world. I mean, Estonia is still the only country that's really done it fully. There are actually different definitions, of course, of electronic voting across the world. So we're really not dealing with a single well-developed market at all. When I say different definitions, I mean, of course, you have the means of casting a vote using a machine, but which may not be connected to the internet. There's a basic difference. There are many, many more technical differences that are within that. I think, as I said before, I'm a little sceptical of single large IT projects. They can always have a failure. They can always have cost. They can always have essentially, a client can be led in a wrong direction. That is all possible with a single big project. So, as a Conservative, I think competition is generally good. I'm aware at the moment that in the UK there are, I think, 3 firms. At the last time I was aware, there's 3 firms that do other parts of the electoral management system, and local authorities effectively purchase from one of those 3 at the moment. I would have thought it might be possible to get to that kind of market fairly easily and straightforwardly in this context.
I just want to pick up on a certain point. I think that it's important to understand that when a vendor comes in, you don't outsource the election to the vendor. What the vendor does is they develop tools which are then given across to the local authority or the electoral management body to basically run, so that the kind of trust model is exactly the same. It's not that the vendor is running the election. I think that's a really, really important point. As I say, it's the existing stakeholders that manage the paper-based process will also manage and be in full control of that electronic process. I think that's a really important point to get across.
So, Mita and Rachel, so the key theme behind Parliament Week is that young people are 30% of the population, but 100% of the future. Do you think that young people would be keen to get behind online voting? Do you think it is the future? Do you think how can we get young people behind it?
Well, yeah, as individually, I can't speak for all of young people, and I think that there needs to be a massive consultation, which is why I'm really excited about the Generation Y report, and I think it's a really good idea in order to engage people. Personally, I think it's a good idea, and I also think that, as Chloe mentioned earlier, that we should look at what comes with it. So I know that a lot of young people don't form their political opinions or don't like to form their political opinions for a long time after hearing other people speaking, and then they start to decide where they're at. So I think what we need is the first stages of consultation.
I would agree with that, and I'm even less qualified to speak on behalf of all young people. Yeah, I would say that in order to get young people behind any product, it has to work for them, and we have to demonstrate its usefulness to engage them. And obviously, in and of itself, an online voting system is great. It's much more convenient, but I do think it needs to come as part of a package, and we need to be able to present to young people what the actual specific advantages are for them, other than just convenience, and how it's going to improve their ability to engage and kind of help their sort of voting journey.
Okay, brilliant. So we're now going to open up to questions.
I think it certainly enticed more younger people into the process. I think that, again, as we've discussed, the fact is that younger people have just grown up using the internet to transact. That's their kind of default transaction model, isn't it? It's not as though they were used to going to polling stations before. So yes, I think it did entice more younger people to actually get engaged and physically to give them a channel to vote effectively.
What about the political landscape? Do you think it's...
No, I mean the political landscape didn't change at all, actually. No.
Any other questions? Yeah, Joseph.
Hi. I think something we haven't really talked about is digital exclusion, the fact that there's quite a sizable minority of people who lack basic internet skills and lack access to the internet, don't have internet in their own homes. And the positive of going to an actual physical polling station is that most people are able to access that. Or postal voting, most people have a residence, and obviously this is probably not going to be a big problem in the future, but I think if we're aiming for 2016 or 2020, I think that's quite a big problem. It excludes the poorest and most vulnerable in society from taking part in democracy.
Trying to take that point.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think it's a great question, and of course it runs through the heart of what we've been talking about. So I would say, first of all, that there is, first of all, there's frequently ways to access internet other than in your own home. So in Norwich, for example, a lot of my constituents use public libraries to do so, and I would fully expect that to actually have a place in what we're doing here. Obviously, that then quickly goes on to privacy issues, which we would, in this project, would need to properly deal with. But I think on the whole, if you were to look at the vision here being one where you could run parallel systems alongside each other, what you've actually got is a really good opportunity to properly address a whole set of accessibility issues. There are people who currently, struggle in various ways to get inside a polling station and use the paper. This would be an opportunity to address many issues in different ways.
I mean, on the flip side of that question, like you just said, there are a lot of issues for people who have disabilities and maybe have vision impairments that we haven't spoken about. I mean, they're being excluded from the current system. I mean, there's someone on Twitter who works for a blind charity, I can't remember what it's called, but they were saying how they've never been able to cast a secret ballot. So I might throw it up to how damaging do you think that is? That we have such a society completely locked up of voting.
Well, I think with reference to blind and low vision voters, I don't know whether anybody knows, but there was a project done in 2011 in Australia, in New South Wales, where the old provisions for blind and low vision voters were, if they wanted to cast their ballot and they couldn't get to the polling stations, they would phone up a hotline and they would speak to an operator. So they would speak to somebody that they didn't know this person, and they relied on the trust of this operator to mark their paper ballot. So that was the existing provisions in New South Wales for voters with disabilities. So how inclusive and how fair is that? So what they did is they implemented an internet voting system, and the implementation of that internet voting system, the outcome of that was that 30,000 blind and low vision voters who would not normally have voted or been engaged in the political process actually came out and voted. So within that group of hard to reach voters, you had a significant increase in participation and a more robust and fairer way of them actually being able to engage and cast a private, secure ballot. So I think that it's technology actually offers a great tool to help reach some of those hard to reach voters. But I do take on board your point that it's important that we don't exclude anybody purely by offering technology solutions as well.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that? Any other questions?
I think people in the UK have, sorry, my name's David Brooks. I think people in the UK sometimes have a misunderstanding about how secret their ballot actually is, and I think that actually creates an advantage to setting up an electronic voting system in that some of the elements of anonymity aren't required to be maintained at the level they might be in certain other countries. It boils down to the issue of if you can't trust the people counting it, you have a problem, but that's what we have now. And I actually think that enables it to make it easier for us to do this than it would in certain other countries.
Yeah, I think that one of the ways that you do the counting in the electronic domain actually, particularly in the Estonian system, is that you form a board of people that come together and basically do what's called the decryption and the counting process. And I would argue that within that board, it's important to have members of the public who can come in and actually verify that the counting process was done in a transparent manner. So again, I think that technology actually offers the ability to improve elements of transparency of the process. So coming back to one of my earlier points is that actually technology can increase security, it can increase trust, and it can increase the transparency compared to paper-based processes.
Yeah, I met with Mike the other evening, we were talking about how there's sometimes backlogs of postal votes that never even reach the count station, and there are also post that arrives late. Like you said, the only thing that's securing your postal vote is envelope.
Yeah, it's incredible. Postal voting, 25% of the population who are engaged in elections now vote by post. It's the channel that is growing, and to me, it is. You could drive a London bus through the postal voting process. It's open to fraud. We've had multiple instances of prosecution, of postal vote fraud, of proven instances where political candidates have gone farming postal votes and filling them out en masse and then putting them into the system. And electronic mechanisms can absolutely mitigate those sorts of fraud-related issues and also reduce error in terms of postal voting. And the postal vote process is actually quite a kind of easy process. How many people have you postal voters? How many have you voted by post? It can be a real faff, right? With the A and the B envelope and the postal vote statement and the ballot, and you get the wrong piece of paper, you put it in the wrong envelope. It causes real usability issues. So you can help mitigate some of those usability issues with an electronic system.
I'd be interested to know how many of you have actually been at a count. Has anyone been at a count? So you've seen what goes on as well. This issue around postal voting is something I feel really strongly about and agree with you, because so many postal votes don't actually make the cut, because you can't match the signatures don't exactly match. You might have signed one bit of paper one day, another bit another day. Your hand, you might have signed one in the morning and one in the evening. Your signature might look a bit different, and I've been there trying to compare them, and having groups of people saying, does this match up, and how many votes? You just think, well, you have to go with the will of it's democracy, right? So if more people think that it's valid or invalid, you go with that. And the possibility of your vote not even counting is pretty high with the postal vote. The other thing, in terms of if you've been to counts, I was at a count for the 2010 election and general election, and the people in charge of sort of, 3 o'clock in the morning, you're really tired. Who can see straight? No one can. I found loads of votes for a candidate that I was there as an observer for in somebody else's pile. And this is just one constituency in one part of the country. Repeat that over and over and over. So one of the other reasons why online voting is so important, I think, is because it may, I believe it will drastically reduce those errors.
Would you, excuse me, I'm going to have to skip out. Is there any question that I can help with in the next 2 minutes before I want to go? Is that okay? Because I think I'll be able to make executives to do that. If you don't think that a local authority chief executive has done that, have some words. That's something very, very serious indeed. Because, as I think was already said tonight, actually we do expect this particular area of public services to be above the fray, and that's really, really important. I would just throw in, though, for debate, actually because of the fragmented nature of electoral services, in the sense that they're run by all those different local authorities, they have never been subject to a proper, thoroughgoing efficiency review. And as somebody who does have to stand up for the interests of taxpayers, that might be something that is worth considering every so often. I'm so sorry.
Can we have a round of applause for Chloe?
I'm so sorry. Thank you all for coming tonight. See you soon. Save me a chocolate.
Into, other spaces like schools or workplaces, all these, general areas where, democracy wasn't an established system. So I was thinking, perhaps if we managed to think of the process of the online voting along with some sort of inclusion mechanism, so to expand to make, just to get back to the idea of involving the general public, to make people think how much this is enlarging our democracy in a way, because there will be more inclusion in terms of, you can name blind people or young people or people who don't actually have access. So I was wondering, perhaps, we can try to think of this online voting process as a part of the bigger process of, like a second wave of this democratization process that started, 30 or 40 years ago.
So do you want to take that?
I agree.
Yeah. Was an agreement there?
We've all talked, I think, Sophia. It's a bit of a moot point that we all think that young people are engaged in politics and want to be involved in politics. And we all think that online voting will help to do that. What do you think will force the decision makers to put the money and the time and the effort behind making this a reality? Because it seems that if it's almost like a vicious cycle, if they're not engaging young people, they won't get young people voting, and they'll say, well, we did another election, more young people aren't voting, 30% in 2015 voted, 20% in, so what do you think?
Your campaign is a lot about moving politicians.
I hope that it won't be that youth turnout dwindles to 10%, and that's the point at which say, okay, it's time to do something about this. What do I think will get politicians to instigate online voting? To be honest, as somebody who's very passionate about young people participating, I would like to think that it would be about young people, but in reality it will be about everyone. And it will be, as I guess the electorate, as we kind of get to the point where it's not just young people that are perhaps advocating online voting, and as this generation kind of grows older and it becomes more and more the way that we live our everyday life, eventually we will reach that. It's just a question of how soon that will be.
Yeah, it just goes back to the point I made earlier. This is going to be expensive. I don't know how much it costs. Maybe you might be able to give us a price tag on that. But it takes a political will of not just people, not just voters, but also political parties, because whoever has power holds the purse strings. And if a political party is not interested or does not serve their purposes to have young people voting, then why would they push that agenda forward? It doesn't make sense to me. And I don't think it would make sense to political parties. I take on board what Chloe says about, certain things have to be above party politics, but really it comes down to who holds the power and who's going to pay for it. I'm sorry she's not here to pick up on this point, but when she keeps referring to the taxpayer, we have a responsibility to the taxpayer. We have to remember that there are a lot of people in this country that vote that do not pay tax, and that we have to include absolutely everyone in this democracy, not just people that are gainfully employed and paying their taxes. Everyone who is entitled to vote should have a say in whether this happens or not.
Hi, my name's Hannah Khan. My question is related to something that I saw on the internet once about Gordon Brown not looking like a Prime Minister in one of the polls. So I want to know whether you think that online voting will increase voting for the manifesto and the content of a party rather than the charisma of the leader.
I think this is a really interesting question, and I think that's actually the reason why a lot of young people are turned off about politics, because when they see that it's all about like that awkward picture of Ed Miliband like giving money to somebody, and then they see a lot of that image and they don't want to be part of that critical image. And I think a really good example to look at when it comes to online debate and stuff is the campaign to change the electoral system, and a lot of that campaigning was done online and through social media, and what you had there was a debate that was very varied, and it was a very superficial debate. I remember seeing an advert being like, there's a race, but look, somebody else wins, that's why we should vote no to this. But actually, issues are a lot more complex than that, and I think it starts at political education. And answering your question earlier about how do we get big changes, I think that now Votes at 16 is a party policy of two major parties. Votes at 16 is inevitable, and that will probably come with political education. And I think what that means is it will create for more informed voters. So when that happens, we'll start discussing the actual issues and policies, and we'll start be thinking about actual radical changes, because young people are the ones who actually push for these changes, as opposed to people who kind of stick to the status quo. So I think that, to answer your question completely, that online voting alone wouldn't solve it. It'd be a step forward, but we need that political education to solve that issue.
We have the gentleman at the front and then Shazman.
What I was going to ask is, what happens when the system crashes? I mean, issues happen all the time. I mean, I work in banking, and our maintenance issues almost every week. Systems crash, not to mention hacking problems. What would happen then? I mean, what happened in Estonia? Has that happened before? Or?
No, well, so you design a system so it doesn't crash. So, for example, you have redundancy built into the system. So, if a server was to go down, you've got an immediate fallback. In the case of Estonia, they have different data centers that are even powered by different power supplies. So they get their electricity from a different source. So you engineer a solution knowing the risks and assuming that the system is going to fail and that you have appropriate fallback mechanisms. And the reality is there's never been a problem with the system falling over in Estonia. Other systems, other electronic systems have fallen over. But it's down to the design and the risk assessment. You take the appropriate measures to ensure that it doesn't fail. That's really important. And it's the same with security as well. You've got to understand where the risks are, and you engineer a response to those risks to make sure it doesn't fail. Because denying people access to democracy is it's not where you want to go. We want to make sure it's robust.
Darius. So we've spoken a lot, I guess, about inclusion and education kind of forming a relatively symbiotic relationship. Like when you spoke about security and issues like that, within the financial services industry, financial literacy is kind of top of the agenda to help that kind of trust factor, security factor come back into the fray. When you mentioned with Smartmatic, you not only provide the infrastructure and the voting machines, but you also, as you said, provide a multi-layered educational program. Is that, as well as providing the actual machines and mechanisms themselves to vote, do you, A, see the educational provision and kind of management of that process as kind of top of the agenda as well, in aiding kind of more democratic electoral process? And if so, do you see those kind of mediums of education mainly being digital?
Not always, actually. I mean, so yes, absolutely. The knowledge transfer is absolutely top of the agenda. It's critical. There's no point building a system that people don't use, and there's no point building a system that people don't trust. And democracy is all about trust. And people need to, if people don't feel that the democratic process is legitimate and trustworthy, then it counts for nothing and people won't use it. So absolutely, creating that knowledge transfer program is really important. We look at what are effective marketing and communication channels in all of the countries we work in, and we don't just work in Estonia. So for example, we've run an automated elections in the Philippines, we've just done projects in Bulgaria, we do many different projects, and there are different channels which are effective in terms of knowledge transfer to different countries. So again, we kind of come in, we engage at a very early stage, we understand what are those effective communication channels, and we treat those on a kind of case-by-case basis, and it's not a case of one size fits all. It's absolutely about having bespoke solutions that meet those requirements and achieve everything you want them to achieve.
I think we have to wrap it up there. But can we have a round of applause for our